would you feel if, like Florinda Milagro de Hoyos, you discovered that your sister's corpse had been removed from her grave and kept like a living doll for 7 years? Hello, I'm Zoe, and welcome back to my channel. Today, we are looking at the case of Dr. Tanzler. Our story starts in Dresden, Germany, in 1877. It was here that our subject, Georg Karl Tanzler, was born, and he would use several different aliases over the coming years. He grew up in Germany, and in 1920 he married Doris Schaefer. The couple had 2 children together, Aisha in 1922 and Clarista in 1924, the latter sadly dying aged 10 from diphtheria. In 1926, the family emigrated to the United States via Havana, Cuba, and settled in Zephyr Hills, Florida. After a time, Tanzler left his family and moved away, taking a job as a radiology technician at the U.S. Marine Hospital in Key West, Florida, under the name Karl von Kossel. The reason he used that name was because during his childhood in Germany, and while travelling later in Genoa, Italy, he said he'd been visited by visions of a long-dead ancestor, Countess Anna Constantia von Kossel, who had revealed to him the face of his true love, an exotic, raven-haired woman whom he was destined to be with forever. At the hospital, he regularly worked on the tuberculosis ward, and it was said that he showed no hesitancy and worked diligently with the patients in his care, even though tuberculosis was extremely infectious and often deadly at that time. In April of 1930, Tanzler met Elena Milagro de Hoyos, a Cuban-American woman who had been brought to the hospital by her mother for an examination due to breathing difficulties. The moment Tanzler laid eyes on her, he was stunned. Elena was the living embodiment of the beautiful, dark-haired woman who had been presented to him in his visions since childhood. Elena was 22, and after examination was confirmed to have contracted tuberculosis. Her hope was that the doctor could cure her of the illness that already claimed the lives of most of her immediate family. Tanzler was 53, but for him it was love at first sight. He made up his mind to do everything in his power to cure her, and then have her as his bride. For Elena, the feeling was not mutual, but the doctor seemed very sincere in his conviction that he could heal her. She was treated at home. Tanzler obtained permission from her family to try some unorthodox methods, including discharges from a Tesla coil, a resonant transformer patented in 1891, to experimental X-ray treatment and preparations of different syrups and potions. Tanzler also lavished Elena with many gifts, demonstrating with little ambiguity his desire for her. Unfortunately for Tanzler, Elena did not reciprocate his romantic feelings and turned down his proposals of marriage, but he simply did not care. Telling her he would love and care for her even if she died. He wrote in his journal how he had hoped that despite the extensive damage, the lesions would heal again. I hoped that when Elena was out of danger, we would get married. As long as she lived, I never abandoned hope. But despite the doctor's best efforts, on the 25th of October 1931, after a year and a half, Elena succumbed to the illness and passed away. A devastated Tanzler offered to pay for the funeral. He also obtained permission from the family to build an above-ground mausoleum in the Key West cemetery. He had her coffin lined with formaldehyde and other preserving agents, and kept the only key to the mausoleum himself. He spent hours at Elena's graveside every day, talking to her corpse, singing songs to her, and reading stories. He claimed her ghost would appear to him when he was inside the vault. These visits went on for 2 years. Tanzler claimed that Elena began talking to him from the other side, telling him she was afraid of decaying and rotting. One evening in April 1933, he removed her body from the mausoleum and transported it home in a wooden cart. Elena's family wondered why Tanzler stopped visiting the gravesite, but just assumed that he had finally moved on. Tanzler took her body to a specially prepared makeshift laboratory he'd created from an old aeroplane and did everything in his power to preserve it. First, he put together the corpse's bones with piano wire and coat hangers and attached glass eyes into the gaping sockets. As the skin decomposed, he replaced it with cloth soaked in plaster of Paris and wax. He fixed the abdominal and chest cavities using rags and made a wig for her using her own hair, which Elena's mother had cut off and kept after her daughter's death. He dressed her in fine clothes, gloves, and jewellery. To mask the stench of decomposition, used copious amounts of disinfectant, preserving agents, and perfume. He then transported Elena's body to his home and to the marital bed. For approximately 7 years, Tanzler and Elena shared a bed, and for the doctor, it was marital bliss. It was reported later by 2 physicians that attended the autopsy that a crude paper tube had been inserted into Elena to facilitate intercourse, but sources for these claims remain unsubstantiated. this time, Tanzler's behaviour had become so erratic that he was fired from his job at the hospital. Nosy neighbours who peeked through his windows saw him dancing with the figure of a woman. Some described it as a large doll or a mannequin. He managed to keep Elena's body in his home for 7 years without being discovered. However, by October 1940, Elena's sister, Florinda, had heard rumours from many people about the doctor's odd behaviour, and wanting to find out the truth, she visited him unannounced at home. She uncovered quickly his horrifying secret and called the authorities. Tanzler was arrested and detained. He was charged with wantonly and maliciously destroying a grave and removing a body without authorization. But the statute of limitations for the crime had expired. A psychiatric evaluation by the court found Tanzler to be mentally competent. After Elena's corpse had been recovered, it was examined by physicians and pathologists and then put on public display at the Dean Lopez Funeral Home, where it was viewed with morbid curiosity by as many as 6,800 people who paid $1 each to view it. In 1944, Tanzler moved to Pasco County, close to Elena's grave, where he wrote an autobiography that appeared in the pulp publication Fantastic Adventures in 1947, called The Secret of Elena's Tomb. Strangely, public feeling at the time was in favour of Tanzler. He was viewed as a sympathetic figure, a tragic romantic who had lost his beloved to a cruel fate. Despite everything, he still clung to the memory of Elena, recreating a life-sized effigy and death mask of her face to replace the confiscated cadaver. He died alone in 1952 at the age of 75. His body remained undiscovered for 3 weeks. From 1930 to 1952, he endlessly obsessed over this seemingly unattainable woman. For 22 years, she had been the focus of his life, alive and dead. To some, it was seen as the ultimate tale of unrequited love and tragic romance. But to most, it is a story of violation, delusion, and obsession. One thing is certain: